I heard them before I saw anything. That's the part nobody tells you about. You always imagine it'll be some dramatic moment. A lipstick on a collar, a strange perfume, a text message left open on the counter. You never think it'll be a sound, a low, unmistakable sound, coming from your own bedroom at 2 in the afternoon on a Tuesday, when you were supposed to be 3 states away, closing a deal that fell apart at the last minute. I'd driven 6 hours straight to surprise her. I even stopped at that bakery on Route 9 she loves, the one with the lemon tarts in the window. I had the box on the passenger seat the whole drive home, thinking about how she'd laugh and say I was ridiculous for driving all that way just to bring her pastries. I stood in the hallway of my own house holding a pink bakery box, and I listened to my wife with another man. I didn't move. I don't know for how long. Long enough that my fingers went numb around the string on the box. Long enough that I stopped feeling anything in my chest at all, like someone had reached in and switched something off. Her name was Yvonne. We'd been married 11 years. I set the box on the hallway table. I walked back out the front door. I sat in my truck in the driveway for a while, and then I drove to a gas station 2 miles away and bought a cup of coffee I didn't drink. I just held it. That was 3 years ago. What happened after that? What I did? What I found out? What it cost me? And what I got back? That's what I'm going to tell you. I want to back up. Because what I found that Tuesday wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what I found out 4 months later, and even that wasn't the worst. The worst was finding out who knew. But let me start at the beginning. Yvonne and I met in our late 20s. She was a paralegal at a firm downtown. I was doing contract work for a construction company, bouncing between job sites, nothing glamorous. She was sharp and funny, and she had this way of cutting through nonsense in a conversation that I'd never seen in anyone before. She'd look at you and say exactly what she thought. No softening, no padding. I found it magnetic. I thought it meant she was honest. I should have paid more attention to who she was honest with and who she wasn't. We got married after 2 years. Small ceremony, her family and mine, a reception at a rented hall outside of Columbus. I remember thinking on that day, standing at the end of the aisle watching her walk toward me, that I was the luckiest man in the room. Probably the luckiest man I knew. We had 2 kids. Owen first, then 3 years later, Petra. Owen was all energy and motion from the day he was born. Petra was quieter, watchful, had her mother's eyes and what I always thought was my stubborn streak. I coached Owen's Little League. I helped Petra build a birdhouse for a school project that took 4 weekends and turned out crooked. And she cried because it was crooked. And I told her that birds didn't care about geometry. It was a good life. It felt like a real life. I worked hard. Maybe too hard. There were stretches, 6 months here, 8 months there, where I was traveling constantly, managing remote projects, gone more than I was home. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself Yvonne understood. She said she understood. She said all the right things. Later I would think about the timeline. Later I would put the dates together and realize that the first time it happened, the first time, as far as I could piece together, was during one of those long stretches. Owen was around 4. Petra wasn't born yet, but I didn't know any of that on the Tuesday with the bakery box. I drove back home after the gas station. His car was gone. A gray sedan. I'd noticed it parked on the street. Gone. I went inside. Yvonne was in the kitchen making coffee like nothing had happened. She didn't know I'd been there. She didn't know I'd heard anything. I watched her for a second from the doorway. She had her back to me. She was humming. I said, "I'm home." She spun around and genuinely looked glad to see me. That's the part I still can't fully process. The gladness looked real. The smile looked real. The smile looked real. The deal fell through, I said. I drove back. "Oh no," she said. "I'm so sorry, babe." She hugged me. I hugged her back. I felt completely hollow. I didn't say anything that night. Or the next night. I know that sounds insane, and believe me, I've had people tell me I should have confronted her immediately. But I needed to think. I needed to know what I was dealing with before I opened my mouth. Because I knew once I did, everything would change, and I couldn't untake whatever I said. So I thought, and I started paying attention. It took me about 3 weeks to figure out who he was. His name was Preston. He worked at the law firm where Yvonne had started her career. Not her current firm, but her old one, where they had apparently stayed in touch. He was a partner now, drove a gray sedan, married 2 kids of his own. I hired someone to confirm it. I know how that sounds. But I needed documentation, not suspicion. I needed something I could hold in my hand and know was real. Because a part of me, the part that had spent 11 years building a life with this woman, kept trying to find alternative explanations. The investigator gave me photos, dates, locations, a restaurant downtown, a hotel in the short north, a parking garage on the east side. The first photo hit me like a physical thing. I had to sit down. The investigator also told me something else, something he said almost as an aside, like it was supplementary information. He said the relationship appeared to have been ongoing for a significant period of time. I asked him to be more specific. He said based on the records he'd accessed and the interviews he'd conducted, he believed it had started approximately 9 to 10 years ago. I did the math in my parking lot and sitting in my truck staring at the dashboard. Owen was 11. Petra was 8. 9 to 10 years ago, Petra would have been or would not have been. Petra would have been in the process of becoming. I sat there for a very long time. I want to tell you, I handled the next part with grace. I didn't. I drove home and I went straight to the bathroom and I was sick. Then I washed my face and I looked at myself in the mirror for a long time. I looked like someone who'd been punched repeatedly in a place that doesn't bruise. The thought I couldn't stop. The thought that circled and circled was Petra's face, her watchful eyes. The way she'd handed me a broken crayon once when she was 3 and watched me like she was waiting to see what I'd do with it. I just kept coloring. She'd smiled like I'd passed some kind of test. I needed to know. Not because it would change how I felt about her. I want to be absolutely clear about that. But because I needed the truth. Because I had been living in a story for 11 years that might have had a completely different plot, and I needed to know what the actual story was. I ordered a home DNA kit. I'm not going to go into detail about how I collected the samples. Yvonne traveled for work twice that month. I had the results in 3 weeks. The envelope sat on my desk for 2 days before I opened it. Owen was mine. Of course he was. But knowing it on paper, seeing it confirmed, I didn't feel relieved. I just felt the weight of the other envelope, the other result. Before I even looked at it, Petra was not my biological daughter. I read the result 4 times. I put the paper down. I picked it back up. The numbers were the same. I sat in my office in the quiet of my own house, and I allowed myself exactly 1 hour to fall apart completely. I cried in a way I had not cried since my father died. Then I got up. I washed my face again, and I started making a plan. Here's what I want you to understand about the plan. It was not about revenge. Or, it started as not being about revenge. It started as being about documentation, protection, clarity. I wanted to understand the full shape of what had happened to me before I made any move. The revenge part came later, when I found out about my brother-in-law. Yvonne has a brother. His name is Kevin. Kevin and I had always gotten along. He was 2 years younger than Yvonne, easygoing, worked in insurance, came to our house for every Thanksgiving and Christmas. He'd taught Owen how to throw a spiral. He'd given Petra a stuffed elephant that she still slept with at 8 years old. I had considered Kevin a friend. I found out he knew about Preston through a phone call I wasn't supposed to hear. I was in the garage. Yvonne was in the kitchen, and she didn't know the door between the garage and the kitchen wasn't fully latched. I was getting tools. I heard her voice, then a pause, then her voice again, lower. Kevin, I'm telling you, I think he suspects something. No, I don't know. You need to keep it together, okay? If he asks you anything, I stood very still. You don't know anything. You've never known anything. That's the story. I went back to what I was doing. I finished getting the tools. I came back inside. That night, I called my lawyer. My lawyer's name is Beth. She's been practicing family law for 23 years, and she has the energy of someone who has heard every possible version of the worst day of your life and has simply decided to be useful about it. I'd used her once before for a contract dispute. I trusted her. I told her everything. The affair. The investigator's findings. The DNA results. The phone call. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "How are you holding up?" I said, "I'm functional." She said that was enough for now. She walked me through the options. Because of the paternity situation, I had choices that went beyond standard divorce proceedings. Paternity fraud in Ohio is not a crime, but it is relevant to civil proceedings. It affects child support calculations. It affects how certain marital assets are structured. It does not, Beth was careful to tell me, automatically terminate my legal relationship with Petra. My name was on her birth certificate. I had been her parent for 8 years, and the courts would look at that. I told Beth I didn't want to terminate anything. Petra was my daughter. That wasn't the question. The question was accountability. I asked Beth what the strongest version of accountability looked like. She told me. I didn't confront Yvonne for another 6 weeks after that call. 6 weeks of sleeping in the same bed, eating dinner at the same table, watching the same television shows in the evening. 6 weeks of performing normalcy so precisely that I sometimes scared myself. Owen came to me during that time with a problem he was having with a kid at school, and I sat with him for an hour and we worked it out. And at the end, he hugged me and said, "Thanks, Dad." I held on to that for a long time after he went upstairs. Petra asked me one afternoon if I was okay. I said I was tired from work. She looked at me for a second with that watchful look, and then she said, "Okay," and went back to her book. She's reading above her grade level. She always has been. The night I decided to move, I called my brother first. His name is Ray. He lives in Cincinnati. I told him everything, and when I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "What do you need?" I said, "I just need someone to know." He said, "I know. Whatever you need, I'm here." That mattered more than I can explain. I came home on a Friday evening with a folder. The folder had the investigator's report, the photographs, the DNA results, a summary document Beth had helped me prepare. I set it on the kitchen table while Yvonne was making dinner. She turned around, saw my face, and I watched something shift behind her eyes. I said, "Sit down." She said, "What is this?" I said, "Please, sit down." She sat. I opened the folder and I pushed it toward her, and I stood across the table and I watched her look at it. She went very still. Then she said, "Where did you get these?" Not a question, a calculation. She was already thinking about angles. I said, "It doesn't matter where I got them." She closed the folder. She took a breath. And then she did something I genuinely did not anticipate. She looked up at me and said, "You have no idea what it's been like for me." I waited. "You were gone," she said. "You were always gone. You chose work over this family for years. What was I supposed to do?" I said, "Not this. It wasn't what you think. It wasn't like I planned, Yvonne." I kept my voice steady. "I know about Petra." The room went completely silent. Her face did something complicated. Defiance and fear arriving at the same time, colliding. "You don't know what you're talking about," she said. I opened the folder and pointed to the DNA results. She looked at them. She looked up at me, and then, very quietly, she said, "She's still your daughter." "Yes," I said. "She is. That's not the point." "Then what is the point?" "The point is that you lied to me for 8 years about something that fundamental. The point is that your brother helped you lie to me. The point is that I built a life on a story you constructed, and I deserved better than that. And so did our kids." She started to cry. In a different version of this story, that might have softened something. It didn't. I'd had 6 weeks to immunize myself. I told her I'd be filing for divorce. I told her she'd be hearing from my lawyer. I told her I'd arranged to stay at Ray's for the next few weeks while we figured out the logistics. She said, "You can't just leave." I said, "I'm not leaving the kids. I'm leaving you." The next part is the part I think people want to know about most, because it's the part where things became visible, where the private nightmare became something other people could see. Kevin called me 2 days after I moved out. He said he wanted to explain. I let him talk. He said he'd only known for about 4 years. He said Yvonne had told him under what she framed as a moment of breakdown, and he'd made the wrong choice in staying quiet. He said he was sorry. He said he was sorry. He said he hoped I could understand that he'd been put in an impossible position. I listened to all of it, and then I said, Kevin, if one of your friends came to you and told you his wife was lying to him about something like this, that the daughter he was raising might not be his, would you tell him? Silence. I would, I said, without hesitation. That's the difference between you and me. I hung up. His apology was real, probably. It didn't change anything. There are choices you make that close certain doors, and the door between Kevin and me is one of those. Some things can be explained but not forgiven, and I've made my peace with knowing the difference. The divorce proceedings took 8 months. Beth was methodical and precise, and she treated the process like an engineering problem, which I appreciated. She negotiated clearly, documented everything, and at no point allowed the other side, Yvonne's attorney, to reframe what had happened as a mutual failure of the marriage. It wasn't a mutual failure. I wasn't perfect, but I had been faithful and present, and I had tried. What happened was a specific choice Yvonne made, repeated over many years, concealed with the help of a family member, and it had specific consequences. The paternity fraud didn't constitute a criminal charge, as Beth had told me from the beginning. But it was significant in the civil proceedings. It affected the financial structure of the settlement substantially. Yvonne's attorney tried several times to argue that I had constructively accepted a certain reality by remaining in the marriage. Beth demolished that argument patiently and completely each time. I got primary physical custody of both kids. This was the thing I told Beth from the first conversation. Whatever else happens, I need my kids. Yvonne got generous visitation. She is their mother and she loves them, whatever else is true, and I have never tried to take that from them. Owen and Petra both needed to be able to have a relationship with her on their own terms. That was not my decision to make. I told Owen the truth when he was ready. He's 12 now. It was the hardest conversation I've had in my adult life, and I will not recreate it here because it belongs to him. What I will tell you is that he sat with it for a while, very quietly, and then he said, "Dad, are you okay?" And something about that question that he asked about me broke something open in a way that needed to be broken open. Petra is 9 now. She doesn't know the full story yet. That conversation will come when she's older, in the right way, with the right words. She's my daughter. That is not complicated. That is the only thing about this entire situation that has never been complicated. What happened with Kevin became public, and not because I made it public. He told people first. I think he was trying to control the narrative, trying to get his version of events established before mine arrived. He told mutual friends, told some extended family, framed it as Yvonne having made mistakes, but characterized me as being cold and unforgiving and unable to see nuance. The thing about trying to control a narrative built on something false is that the truth keeps being true no matter how you describe it. People who knew me heard Kevin's version. They called me. I told them what had happened. Not with drama, not with editorializing, just the sequence of events. Most of them came to their own conclusions quickly. Kevin's version of events required people to believe that I had overreacted to a situation I fundamentally misunderstood. That reading required them to also discount 8 years of documented deception, a DNA test, and a phone call where Yvonne asked Kevin to coordinate their lies. That's a lot to discount for someone you've known for over a decade. I didn't ruin Kevin's reputation. He made choices, and those choices had consequences that rippled in directions he didn't anticipate. I understand the impulse to want someone to blame for your own accountability, but he'd had 4 years to tell me the truth, and he hadn't. Here's the thing I want to say that I don't think gets said enough in stories like this. The hardest part wasn't the anger. Anger is useful. Anger moves you forward, gives you direction, gets you out of bed in the morning and in front of your lawyer and through the paperwork and through the court dates. Anger is fuel. The hardest part was the grief. Because I grieved the marriage I thought I had. I grieved the version of Yvonne I believed in for 11 years. The one who was sharp and direct and honest. I grieved the Thanksgivings with Kevin being actually my friend and not someone keeping a secret. I grieved the uncomplicated version of my daughter's face. The one where I didn't carry a specific knowledge alongside the love. The love didn't change. That's the thing. The love for my kids didn't change by a fraction, but knowledge changes the texture of things, and you grieve the texture that's gone even while you hold on to what remains. I'm not someone who talks about this stuff easily. I'm in my 40s. I work in construction management. I was raised by a man who considered discussing feelings to be roughly equivalent to public crying. But I went to therapy, twice a week for a year, then once a week, now twice a month. Not because I was falling apart, but because I needed the space to put the weight down for a while so I could carry it better everywhere else. My therapist is a quiet man with an office full of plants who lets silences sit until they resolve themselves. He's never once told me how I should feel about anything. He just asks questions that force me to look at things from angles I've been avoiding. He's the one who helped me understand the difference between accountability and punishment. That what I was seeking wasn't to destroy Yvonne or Kevin, it was to have the reality of what had happened acknowledged. To not carry it alone anymore. To have the shape of things be accurate to the world. It's been 2 years since the divorce finalized. I'm in a 2-bedroom apartment 20 minutes from the house, which Yvonne kept as part of the settlement arrangement. Owen and Petra are with me 4 nights a week. We have a routine. Tuesdays, Owen picks the takeout. Thursdays, Petra picks the movie. On weekends, we've been hiking when the weather holds. Owen is becoming someone I find genuinely interesting to talk to. He has opinions about things now. About his school, his friends, about what he wants to do eventually. He argues with me, and he's right sometimes. I like that. Petra built a birdhouse at school last year. She came home and told me it was perfect and slightly too big for the birds in our region, but that birds didn't care about geometry. I laughed until my eyes watered. She looked at me like I was being ridiculous, which I was. And then she laughed too. I don't know what Yvonne's situation looks like now. We communicate about the kids through an app that keeps records of every message. It's better that way. She's moved into a place closer to her sister. She's seeing someone, I think. That's not my concern anymore. Preston, from what I understand through people who knew both of us, ended his marriage as well. That's between him and his family. I have no interest in his life. Kevin and I don't speak. At some point, maybe. Some version of something will be possible. Not now. My brother Ray drove up from Cincinnati 3 months after the divorce finalized, and we went fishing for 2 days. Just the two of us. And we didn't talk about any of it. We talked about football and bad movies and our dad, who's been gone 11 years. On the second night, he said, "You doing okay?" And I said, "Yeah. I think actually yes." And I meant it. Here's what I want to say to whoever is listening to this. If you are in that place right now, the place where you're sitting in your truck, in your own driveway, holding a coffee you're not going to drink, trying to understand what just happened to your life, I want you to know that the clarity comes. Not all at once. Not cleanly. It comes in pieces, at inconvenient times, when you're making dinner or sitting in a parking lot or watching your kid read a book on the couch. But it comes. The version of yourself on the other side of it is not broken. He's quieter, maybe. More careful about certain things. He carries things he didn't carry before. But he's also freer in a way that's hard to explain. Freer from the particular weight of living in a story that was never quite true. I would give anything for my kids to not have had to go through this. I would give a great deal to have had a different story entirely. But I can't give those things, and wishing for them is a road that goes nowhere. What I can do is be here. Be honest. Be the person my son trusts enough to ask if I'm okay, and my daughter trusts enough to bring a slightly too big birdhouse to. That's enough. On the days when things feel hard, it is exactly enough. And honestly, most days now, it's more than enough. I've thought a lot about cause and effect, not in any grand cosmic sense, just in the plain, practical way that a man who works in construction thinks about it. You pour a bad foundation and the building doesn't fall immediately. It stands. It looks fine for years. And then one day something shifts and the cracks appear and no amount of patching the surface fixes what's wrong underneath. That's what happened to my marriage. The foundation was wrong from somewhere early on, and everything built on top of it. The holidays, the routines, the ordinary Tuesday evenings, was standing on something that was never going to hold permanently. I didn't know that. But Yvonne did, and Kevin did, and they made a choice every single day to keep building upward anyway and let me believe the ground was solid. I don't say that to make them villains in some simple story. People make choices out of fear and self-interest, and the very human desire to avoid a difficult conversation. And those choices compound, and after enough time, the weight of them becomes its own kind of trap. I understand that. Understanding it doesn't change what it cost me, but it keeps me from carrying anger that would only hollow me out. What I've learned, what this whole thing forced me to reckon with, is that integrity isn't something you perform for other people. It's something you either practice privately in the small moments when no one is watching, or you don't have it at all. Kevin was a decent man in most of the ways you could observe him. He showed up. He was kind to my kids. He taught Owen how to throw a spiral. None of that was false. But when the moment came that actually required something of him, when he had the information and the choice and the opportunity to do the hard right thing, he chose the easy wrong one. And he had to live with that, and eventually so did everyone around him. Yvonne is not a monster. I need to say that clearly because it would be easier if she were. She's a person who made a catastrophic choice and then spent years managing the consequences of it instead of ever confronting them. That kind of ongoing concealment has a cost. It changes you. You can't spend a decade maintaining a lie without it warping something in how you see yourself and everyone you're supposed to love. What I know about myself now that I didn't know before, I am harder to break than I thought. That's not bravado. I genuinely did not know if I would come through this intact. I wasn't sure, sitting in that parking lot at the gas station, what kind of man was going to be left when the dust settled. What I found out is that grief doesn't finish you. It changes the shape of you, but it doesn't finish you. Petra built a birdhouse that was slightly too big and completely hers. Owen asks if I'm okay and means it. My brother Ray drove 4 hours to go fishing and didn't need to say anything profound to make it matter. That's what's real. That's what held. And anything that tries to take that from you, any lie, any concealment, any carefully managed fiction, will eventually crack under the weight of its own dishonesty. The foundation was bad, but I'm building on different ground now, and this time I know exactly what's underneath.